I am Nova. And I just turned 33 last month. 2 years ago. I sat at my parents' dining table and watched them hand my brother Ethan a check for $230,000 for his new house. That same night I overheard my father tell my mother, "At least one of our children isn't a failure." I walked out, deleted their contacts and stopped calling. 2 years of silence passed until last week when my brother drove past my new 40-acre property and immediately called our father screaming, "You need to see what Nova has built." Let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button before I reveal how I secretly built my success while my family thought I was wasting my potential. Growing up in Lake Forest, an affluent suburb just north of Chicago, where our family looked immaculate from the curb. We lived in a 2-story colonial with a clipped lawn and a 3-car garage. Everything my parents prized: presentation, pedigree, and money. My father, Richard Hale, climbed the ladder as an investment banker, counting out 60-hour weeks and measuring his worth by year-end bonuses. My mother, Sylvia, was the consummate socialite: fundraisers, luncheons, and a careful polish on our family image. From my earliest memories, I could tell my parents treated Ethan and me differently, not glaringly but unmistakably. Ethan, 3 years older, was their heir apparent, the son who would carry the name and replicate Dad's financial triumphs. When 8-year-old Ethan showed an interest in baseball, Dad hired a private coach and put a batting cage in the backyard. At the same age, I fell in love with plants and started a little vegetable plot. Mom scolded me about the dirt I tracked in. Dad called it playing in the mud. After Ethan's games, Dad would beam, "He's got real talent," and set his trophies on the mantle. My science fair ribbons and environmental certificates lived in drawers, pulled out only if I asked why they weren't on display. By middle school, the pattern was set. When Ethan made the honor roll, they took him to a Chicago Bulls game, courtside. When I hit the same mark, I got a nod and, "That's the baseline." The message hardened over time. Grades were expected, but only certain kinds of achievement counted. Holidays underscored the gap. For Ethan's 16th, a shiny sports car with a big red bow in the driveway. For mine, a used sedan because, as Dad put it, I just needed something practical to get around. It wasn't only about the price, though that difference was loud. It was the excitement and celebration wrapped around his gifts, compared to the dutiful utilitarian tone around mine. There was one exception: my grandmother, Mabel. Dad's mother grew up on a small downstate farm before marrying my grandfather and moving to the suburbs. She understood why I was enthralled by growing things. "Not everybody puts a dollar sign next to success," she told me during weekend visits to her cottage, which held the most glorious garden. "Some of us count success by how much good we return to the soil." Under her hands, I learned companion planting, composting, and sustainable methods. While my parents saw quirks and impracticality, Grandma Mabel recognized a calling. She gave me rare seeds, proper tools, and books about innovative agriculture that I devoured every summer. "You have a gift, Nova," she'd say, her weathered fingers guiding mine as we transplanted seedlings. "The world needs people who know we can't keep taking from the land without putting back." In my junior year, I engineered a vertical growing system for the science fair and won regional recognition. A local newscast covered it. A small sustainability magazine interviewed me. My parents showed up to the ceremony, but they looked ill at ease when other adults congratulated them. "It's just a school project," Dad brushed off a colleague who'd seen me in the paper. "Ethan's applying to Wharton next year. That's where the real prospects lie." The summer before my senior year, Grandma Mabel was diagnosed with aggressive cancer. I sat by her as often as I could, doing homework in the hospital, talking about studying environmental science. "Promise me you'll follow your heart," she whispered on one of her clear days. "Your father lost his way chasing money. Don't make that mistake." She died 3 weeks before graduation, the only person who had truly championed my path. At the funeral, I heard Dad assuring relatives I'd grow out of the environmental phase and pick something practical. That night, back in my room surrounded by college brochures for environmental programs, I promised Mabel silently that I'd stay true, even without backup. When acceptance letters came, the 2 sets of standards rang out. Ethan got into Northwestern's elite business program, and my parents threw a lavish party. Relatives, friends, business associates toasting his future. I was accepted to the University of Illinois for environmental science and got a brief, "That's nice, dear," over breakfast. I mentioned their research in sustainable agriculture and how excited I was about it. Dad peered over the newspaper. Environmental science? What do you even do with that? Save the rainforest. He chuckled as if the question didn't deserve an answer. I laid out what I'd researched. Sustainable agriculture, corporate sustainability, environmental policy. How the field was expanding because companies finally understood sustainability had business value. Dad flicked a look at Mom. If businesses care about it, maybe there's hope, he said, retreating behind the paper. The money gap followed us to college. My parents paid Ethan's tuition in full, set him up in a new apartment and gave him a generous allowance. For me, they covered tuition and the dorm but made extras my problem. Consider it a learning experience, Mom said when I asked about the difference. Ethan's pursuing a serious path that needs networking and connections. Your interests are more personal. I took a 20-hour job in the campus sustainability office, balancing work with a full course load. Ethan posted photos from fraternity formals and finance mixers while I split time between classes, my job, and the university's experimental plots. Despite the grind, I thrived. Professor Iris Bennett, a leading voice in urban agriculture, noticed my freshman project. Your vertical design is inventive, she said. Have you thought about scaling it for urban food deserts? Under her mentorship, I expanded my high school prototype into a system that maximized space and slashed water use. By junior year, a community garden near campus piloted my design. The university gave me a $15,000 innovation grant, but when I shared the news at home, Mom smiled politely and pivoted to Ethan's summer offer from Goldman Sachs. Dinner became a monologue about his trajectory, connections, promotions, starting salaries. My grant, a tool to fight food insecurity, barely earned a nod. As graduation approached, our paths diverged completely. Ethan finished his business degree and, with Dad's connections, landed at a prestigious Chicago firm, the kind of starting package that made Mom glow when she bragged to friends. I graduated with honors in environmental science, specializing in sustainable AG systems with a minor in business sustainability. Jobs in my niche were sparse. After months of trying, I accepted an unpaid internship at City Sprout, a nonprofit building community gardens in underserved Chicago neighborhoods. Internship. At your age. Dad's disappointment weighed heavy over dinner. Ethan was at six figures by 23. I explained City Sprout's cutting-edge urban systems and why the experience mattered. Cutting-edge gardening, Dad muttered. This is what 4 years of tuition buys. Mom squeezed my wrist. Have you thought about an MBA? Pair that with your degree and you'll find better paid options. The subtext was obvious. Shelve your passion, chase the money. I declined politely but firmly. Conversation drifted back to Ethan's latest bonus and condo hunting. I escaped the constant comparisons by renting a tiny studio in a rougher, cheaper area. The commute was long, the block iffy, but it was mine and quiet from the chorus of "Be practical." You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mom said as I left. We want what's best. I know, I told her. We just don't agree on what best looks like. 3 years out of college, I climbed from unpaid intern to project manager at City Sprout. The salary was modest for Chicago and the studio remained my reality, but the work mattered. We launched 7 thriving gardens in food desserts, taught sustainable practices, and brought fresh produce to places with almost none. A sustainability magazine featured my vertical system, and I spoke at a regional urban AG conference. Professionally, I felt fulfilled. At home, my achievements still didn't register because pay stubs mattered more than impact. Family dinners were rarer but no less tense. They asked about money, not meaning. Meanwhile, Ethan surged. Every promotion and bonus earned expensive gifts and public pride from my parents. The turning point came at Ethan's engagement dinner. He had just proposed to Lena, daughter of one of Dad's golf club friends. She was from the same social orbit, worked in luxury brand marketing, and checked all of my parents' boxes for a daughter-in-law. Mom orchestrated an elaborate dinner, calling it the season's event among their circle. I arrived early to help. Despite everything, I was genuinely happy for Ethan. We'd stayed cordial even if distant. Thanks for coming, he hugged me quickly. It means a lot to Lena. She always wanted a sister. The dining room glowed, fresh flowers, china, crystal that only saw daylight for peak occasions. A caterer plated every favorite of Ethan's. The house filled with my parents' friends, Lena's family, and Ethan's colleagues. No one from my world, another quiet reminder of our separate lives. Dinner rolled into toasts about Ethan's childhood feats and warm welcomes to Lena. Dad, flushed from champagne, stood for what sounded like the final toast. "Family is everything," he said, voice thick with pride. "Nothing beats seeing your children succeed and build their own lives. Ethan has always made us proud." He lifted his glass higher. "And now, as he starts a family, we want to help set the foundation." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Lena, Ethan, we want to offer you this to begin properly." Ethan opened it, blinked, and passed it to Lena, who couldn't hide her astonishment. $230,000, Dad announced to appreciative murmurs. "A down payment for a home worthy of your future." Applause surged. I froze, my champagne half raised. $230,000. More than I'd earn in several years. Gifted in public, proud and easy, while I scraped by on a project manager paycheck. I smiled and clapped, swallowing down complicated emotions. It wasn't envy of their things. It was the incandescent proof of what my parents valued and what they didn't. After dinner, I slipped into the kitchen to help the staff. As I stacked dessert plates, I heard my parents step into the butler's pantry on the other side of the partition, unaware I was there. "A perfect evening," Mom sighed. Everyone was dazzled by Ethan and Lena. "They're beautiful together." "He's done everything right," Dad agreed, ice tinkling in his glass. "Right school, right job, right partner. We couldn't ask for more." Pause. I should have made a noise, let them know I was there, but I didn't. Something held me still. "At least one of our kids isn't a failure," Dad added, lower but perfectly clear. "All that education and Nova's still playing in the dirt, living paycheck to paycheck. I don't know where we went wrong with her." The plate nearly slipped from my hand. Hearing the word failure out loud after years of hints and dismissals still sliced. "She's young," Mom tried half-hearted. "Maybe she'll come around." "I doubt it. She's as stubborn as my mother." Frankly, it was a mistake for Mom to encourage that gardening nonsense. Stuffed her head with saving the world ideas instead of a proper career. I set the plate down and stepped into the doorway. They jumped, guilt flashing. "Nova." Mom recovered into her social smile. "We were just coming to find you for the champagne toast." "No," I said, calm and quiet. "You were labeling me a failure." "Don't worry, I heard." Dad straightened. "You misunderstood. We were expressing concern about your finances." "No, I understood. You handed Ethan $230,000 because he followed your script. I'm a failure because I chose work that matters to me over a thicker paycheck." "That isn't fair," Mom cut in. "Ethan made practical choices that secure his future. We're worried about yours." "My future is building sustainable food systems where they're needed," I said. "I'm sorry that isn't dazzling enough for you." Dad set down his glass, face hardening. "This idealism has gone on long enough, Nova. You have a good education you could apply to something worthwhile. Instead, you're wasting it on glorified gardening that won't provide real security." Heat rose through me, years of swallowed hurt finding a voice. "Worthwhile. We help neighborhoods in food deserts grow fresh food. We teach practices that matter beyond your next quarter. The fact it doesn't come with a corner office doesn't make it worthless." "No one said your little gardens aren't nice," Mom soothed in that smoothing overtone. "We just want more than scraping by while you do charity work." "It's not charity," I said. "It's my career. My vocation. And it makes a real difference." "A real difference to your bank account would change your life more," Dad countered. "Ethan understood that. That's why we can invest in his house. He's shown responsibility." "So help is only for children who match your path?" I asked. Dad's patience snapped. "Why would we invest in your future when you've chosen to be a failure?" The word hung there final. Mom's eyes widened, but she didn't contradict him. "I see," I said, strangely calm. "Thank you for the clarity." I walked past them, collected my purse and jacket, congratulated Ethan and Lena again, and left. No one followed. No one tried to explain. I drove home in a rainstorm that suited my mood and made a decision I'd been circling for years. Until my parents could respect my choices, see value beyond earnings, I would stop offering them access to my life. Back at my apartment, I deleted their contacts, unfriended them, blocked their numbers. It hurt, but the relief was startling. For the first time since childhood, I wouldn't measure myself through their disappointment. The first weeks were both freeing and frightening. Without their disapproval, I felt lighter. But the absence of family, even flawed family, left a hollow. I threw myself into City Sprout, channeling everything into expanding our programs and refining the vertical system. Through years of iteration, my hydroponic design now cut water use by 60% while boosting yields in tight spaces. We'd installed it in 3 community gardens, but I could see a much wider horizon. One harvest day at a new site, I ran into Professor Bennett volunteering with her current class. "Nova, this is remarkable," she said, studying the towers of greens. "You solved the circulation issues we discussed years ago." We caught up and I shared my thoughts about commercial applications. "Non-profit budgets can't scale it," I said. "But the tech could transform urban production." "You should meet Adrian Park," she said. "He runs a sustainability-focused AG-Tech fund. This is exactly his lane." That introduction cracked everything open. Adrian toured our garden, asked sharp questions about efficiency, nutrients, and scale, and 2 weeks later invited me to pitch his team. "Your system has commercial legs. Restaurants, grocery chains, even residential," he said. The idea of scaling beyond City Sprout thrilled and terrified me. I hadn't pictured myself as a founder, but the chance to multiply impact was too compelling. Over the next month, I wrote a full business plan for what became Sky Harvest, a company dedicated to compact, water-wise growing systems for cities. Adrian's fund invested $75,000 for 20% equity, enough for a small workshop and a part-time engineer. I took a leave from City Sprout, promising to support their gardens as I built the new venture. The early days were brutal. I logged 80-hour weeks, splitting time between engineering, operations, and chasing first clients. For 3 months, I didn't pay myself, stretching savings to snapping point in my tiny studio. Doubt crept in at 3 a.m. Was Dad right? Was I chasing a pretty ideal while Ethan built a real career? Holidays were worst. The quiet where family used to be rang loud. The break came 4 months in. A regional grocery chain agreed to pilot an in-store Sky Harvest garden. Lettuces, herbs, and small veg growing in view of shoppers. The appeal was obvious. Ultra-fresh produce with drastically reduced water and 0 pesticides. Local business news covered the installation, and suddenly restaurants and other grocers were calling. 6 months after founding, I hired our first full-timers. Nadia, a brilliant mechanical engineer who refined irrigation, and Caleb, a horticulturist who expanded our crop library. Through extended family gossip, I heard my parents were well. Ethan and Lena bought a luxury townhouse in Lincoln Park with the down payment. Dad earned a big promotion, Mom chaired another gala. Those distant updates sparked a mix of sadness and relief. Aunts and cousins tried to play bridge, inviting me to events where my parents would be present, passing along soft messages about reconciliation. I held the line. "I'll consider reconnecting when they respect my choices and acknowledge the hurt," I told them. "They miss you," Aunt Susan said once. "They miss who they wanted me to be," I replied. "Not me." By the end of Sky Harvest's first year, we hit a quiet milestone: profitability. Barely, but black ink. We had 8 commercial installs and a waiting list. A well-known restaurant group contracted us to build a rooftop system for their farm-to-table concept, our largest project yet. I moved from the studio into a small 1-bedroom in a safer neighborhood. It wasn't Ethan's townhouse, but it was mine, earned doing work I believed in. With the business steadying, I started saving for a dream seeded long ago with Mabel. Land. I pictured a place to test and refine systems at scale, blending urban innovation with practices that could lighten resource use in traditional farming. I opened a savings account labeled Farm Fund and funneled 30% of my modest salary plus any consulting extras into it. The balance crept upward as Sky Harvest grew. By the end of our second year, we had 16 employees and a larger production facility for our proprietary systems. A national sustainability magazine profiled us, and suddenly a hotel chain wanted rooftop gardens, while a school district asked for educational systems. Adrian introduced Series A investors. My original stake diluted, but the valuation jumped so much that on paper my net worth edged toward 7 figures, something that would have stunned my parents. I kept my boundaries. I sent a gift but skipped a cousin's wedding because my parents would be there. When Ethan left a voicemail on the Sky Harvest office line, The only place he could reach me, about a health scare of Mom's which turned out minor, I replied with a brief, kind email and kept my distance. As the 2-year anniversary of cutting contact neared, the farm fund reached what I'd need for a down payment on the kind of property I imagined. I started touring agricultural listings within commuting distance of Chicago. Good soil, useful buildings, and sun-friendly fields. After a dozen almosts, my agent called excited. 40 acres just hit the market in McHenry County. Old farmhouse that needs love, a decent barn, perfect southern exposure. The seller wants a quick deal. It was the top end of my budget. It would take every cent I'd saved plus a mortgage that would stretch me. But the moment I drove the gravel lane, I knew. The 1920 farmhouse had good bones beneath the dated finishes. The barn was exactly the workspace I needed. The gently rolling fields could host side-by-side trials. I made an offer that day. After short negotiations, it was accepted. 60 days later, I held the keys to 40 acres of possibility. A physical proof of the path I picked despite my family's verdicts. I stood in the middle of my first test field at golden hour, sun on my face, and felt Mabel beside me, approving the literal and figurative seeds I was about to plant. 2 years after cutting contact, Sky Harvest was a respected name in sustainable ag tech. We had 15 full-time staff, systems across 3 states, and were in talks with an international hotel group. The company gave me financial stability I hadn't imagined at the start, but the truest joy came from the farm that was now home. Over 6 months of nights and weekends, with help from friends, I renovated the farmhouse to keep its character but add modern function. We converted the barn into a workshop research hub to stress test prototypes before client installs. The first 5 acres held comparative trials, traditional methods versus our sustainable variants, measured meticulously for resources and yields. Maya, my closest friend, organized the moving party. By sunset, we were on the wide front porch with pizza and beer, celebrating. To Nova, Maya said, raising her bottle. Who knew what she wanted and kept going even when the people who should have cheered the loudest couldn't see it. Her words stung and soothed at the same time, recognizing the win and the absence. My friends had become my chosen family, steadfast and curious about my work rather than my income. Still, the quiet where a mother and father might have been was a sadness I'd learned to live with. The universe has a flair for irony. The very next day, while unpacking in the kitchen, I heard tires crunch up the drive. Expecting a friend with a forgotten item, I stepped onto the porch and froze. A familiar luxury SUV I hadn't seen in 2 years. Ethan's. He and Lena stared through the windshield as if they were unsure it was me. He rolled the window down. Nova? Is that you? Ethan, I said, keeping my tone even. This is unexpected. He got out slowly, taking in the spread of land. We were leaving Lena's parents' place in Wisconsin and took the scenic route. I saw the Sky Harvest sign at the road and thought, no way. Is this yours? All 40 acres, I said. It's beautiful, Lena added genuinely, though her designer casuals looked out of place on gravel. The house is charming. Silence stretched, the awkward kind built from 2 years of nothing. I sighed. Want to come in? I just made coffee. They followed, their sleek shoes quiet on the old, restored floors. I showed them the first floor. The exposed beams we'd uncovered, the plans for the rest. You did this yourself? Ethan asked, touching a lintel. With friends, I said. The bones were good. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, conversation careful. They'd been avoiding highway construction and took back roads. I almost didn't pull in, Ethan admitted. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. I'm not sure either, I said honestly. But here we are. He stared into his mug. I've wanted to reach out 100 times. After what Dad said. After I didn't say anything. I didn't rescue him. You should have, I said without heat. But we all chose. I didn't know you started a company, he said. Or that it was doing this well. He gestured around us. There's a lot I don't know about your life, I said. That was part of the problem. He nodded. I've been following Sky Harvest for a year. One of my clients invests in ag tech. Your name came up in a meeting and I thought that can't be my sister, this innovative CEO. He offered a small, crooked smile. I didn't know what to say to you. After I stood by while Dad called you a failure, then took their house money. I was ashamed. Lena touched his arm. He's been questioning a lot. career choices. Ethan looked younger, uncertain. I'm good at my job, he admitted, but I don't love it. Each morning I put on the suit and play the role Dad groomed. Lately, I wonder if I'm living his dream instead of mine. I didn't expect that. If not this, I asked, then what? He shrugged. I don't know yet. But watching you build something that matters, on your terms, makes me think. We toured the place. The converted barn with experimental systems, the trial plots with side-by-side methods, and the small orchard I was reviving with heritage apples. Ethan's questions shifted from surface to substance. Not Dad's ROI interrogation, but real curiosity about the how and why. At the edge of the vegetable beds he stopped and looked across the fields. Dad was wrong about you, he said simply. So wrong. You're not a failure. You've made something extraordinary. His words hit harder than I expected. Before I could answer, he took out his phone. He needs to see this. Ethan, don't, I started, but he'd already put the call on speaker. Dad picked up on the third ring. Everything okay? Weren't you driving back from Lena's parents? Dad, you need to see what Nova's built, Ethan said, urgent. She owns 40 acres in McHenry County. She built a successful company. She has employees, clients in multiple states. Everything you said was wrong. Silence stretched on the line. You're with Nova? Dad's voice lost its certainty. Yes. We happened upon her sign. You and Mom should come. You need to understand what she's doing. Another pause. Is she there? Can I speak to her? Ethan glanced at me. I shook my head. I wasn't ready, not like this. She's not available, Ethan said. But listen, the things you said that night, you were wrong. Nova's not wasting anything. She's building something important. I see, Dad said, unreadable. Thank you for telling me. Your mother and I will discuss this. After he hung up, Ethan winced. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I couldn't let him keep that story in his head. It's done, I said. But hear me, I didn't build this to prove him wrong or to win on his scoreboard. I built it because the work matters. I know, Ethan said. That's why it's so impressive. At the door he asked if we could stay in touch. I've missed my sister, he said, tentative. I want to know your work. If you'll let me. I nodded. I'd like that. But understand, my boundaries with Mom and Dad stand. If we rebuild, it's separate from them. I get it, he said. This is between us. I watched their car fade down the lane, feeling everything at once. The door to a sibling relationship I'd assumed was shut had cracked open. At the same time, I felt fiercely protective of the life I'd grown without my parents' approval. A week later, I pulled into the drive and spotted a black Mercedes sedan parked near the house. My stomach tightened. I knew that car, Richard's. After 2 years of silence, both my brother and my parents had arrived within days of each other. I sat in my truck a long minute, breathing. I could leave. I could call and tell them to go. Or I could walk onto my porch and have this conversation on my terms, on my ground. I chose the third. They stood awkwardly when I approached. Mom looked older, the perfect grooming showing a few new seams. Dad's expression was the old professional mask. You look well, Mom said, voice shaky. What are you doing here? I asked, stopping at the bottom step. Ethan told us about his visit, Dad said. About your property. Your business. We wanted to see for ourselves. 2 years of silence, I said, the ache bubbling up, and you just show up. We should have called, Mom said. We didn't think you'd say yes. She wasn't wrong. If they'd called, I would have said no. Well, you're here, I said like I had to Ethan. I unlocked the door but didn't wave them in yet. Why exactly did you come? Dad gestured to the fields. To see what you've built. Ethan was emphatic that we had the wrong picture. The phrasing was pure Richard, sidestepping apology. Still, the drive itself was something I didn't expect. Fine, I said, pushing the door open. I'll show you around, then we'll talk. This tour felt different. Vindication braided with vulnerability. As we moved through the house, Mom's decorator eye caught details most miss. You've done a beautiful job, she said, sounding honest. The place has such character. Dad stayed quiet until my home office, where framed press and technical drawings lined the wall. Ethan said you have systems in 3 states. He said, scanning. How many employees? 15 full-time plus contractors, I said, watching him absorb it. In the barn, I explained water reclamation and nutrient delivery, hard metrics married to values. For the first time, I saw genuine professional curiosity flicker in him, questions about scale and patents. In the fields, afternoon sun laying long gold stripes across the test plots, Mom asked about why we'd placed methods side by side. We compare water, yield, and nutrient density, I said. The data refines our commercial systems and provides case studies. Back in the kitchen, I made coffee out of reflex. We sat at the table, facing the conversation I dreaded and wanted. This is impressive, Dad said at last, sounding like a boardroom review. Clearly more than we realized. That's because you never asked, I said evenly. You decided my work didn't count because it didn't match your definition. Mom placed a light hand on Dad's sleeve. We were worried about your security, she said. We didn't see that you were building something with real potential. They still chose the word potential over acknowledging achievement, but I let it pass. My work had value when I made $28,000 at City Sprout, I said. Impact isn't tied to a balance sheet. Dad shifted. Perhaps we focus too much on conventional metrics, he said, shockingly close to an admission. Your brother was furious with us after he saw your operation. You called me a failure, Mom said softly, eyes on her cup. Those were your exact words, Nova. We didn't stop you. That was wrong. I hadn't expected that kind of plain naming. Yes, I said. It was the culmination of years of being dismissed because I wouldn't follow your map. Dad stared out at the fields. I built my career where success is measurable. Margins, assets, ROI, he said. I applied the same ruler to my children and dismissed anything that didn't fit. He glanced back at the barn and rose. Your work has its own metrics. Water saved, resources conserved, innovations that solve real problems. I didn't have the language for it, so I rejected it. That was short-sighted. From Richard, that was enormous. His version of an apology. Mom's fingers hovered near mine. We've missed you, she said. Learning from Ethan what you've done, while we were absent, made us see what our narrowness cost. I missed you too, I said. But I couldn't keep standing in a house where my work and self were belittled. It was breaking me. And the fact that you cut us off entirely should tell us how badly we failed, Mom said, unusually direct. Dad cleared his throat. If we were to try again, what would it take, your terms? I blinked. I'd expected grudging respect at best, not this question. Full respect for my choices and my work, I said. Not just now that it makes money. An acknowledgement of the harm from years of comparing me to Ethan and calling my path worthless. He nodded slowly. That seems fair. At the door as they left, Dad paused. Your grandmother would be proud of this, he said. She told me you had a connection to the land. I should have listened. The mention of Mabel cracked something open. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. That night Ethan called. They were quiet on the drive back, he said. Dad even said your business model was more sophisticated than he thought. His version of a rave. I laughed despite myself. Baby steps. Are you okay with them reaching out? He asked. I feel like I set this in motion. I'm processing, I said. Part of me is glad they came. Part of me worries their respect is conditional, on revenue, not on values. That's fair, he said. Seeing the place makes it real. It hits different. 6 months later, spring transformed the test fields into a quilt of green. The farm wasn't just home, it was a living lab. My family landscape shifted too. Ethan visited monthly, genuinely engaged, sometimes offering financial strategy in ways that served my vision rather than supplanting it. I never thought I'd enjoy getting dirt under my nails, he joked on one visit, helping wire a monitor. Dad would faint if he saw me doing manual labor on a farm. He'd trimmed his workweek to 4 days, exploring long-ignored interests. With my parents, improvement was tentative but real. We scheduled monthly calls, stiff at first, then less so. Mom visited twice more, bringing small things for the house, a peace language she knew. Dad sent articles about AG tech and corporate sustainability, his way of learning my world. The biggest test came when I invited them, Ethan and Lena, to dinner at the farmhouse. An early autumn breeze carried the scent of ripening apples. I cooked with our own produce, a table that embodied what sustainable practice can yield. After we ate, Mom handed me a photo album. I realized we documented so little of your milestones, she said. Inside were what pictures she could find of my science fairs and early projects, plus recent clippings about Sky Harvest she'd quietly collected. It was a sincere attempt to repair the story. "Thank you," I said simply. Later, Dad cleared his throat, his tell for something important. "We've been thinking about how we supported Ethan and not you," he said carefully. "The down payment that broke us apart." Ethan shifted, still guilty. "We'd like to make it right," Dad said. $230,000. Use it however you see fit. Business, farm, personal. The number hung there. 2 years ago I would have ached for that recognition. Now, having built without it, the offer felt different. "I appreciate it," I said. "But I don't need it personally, and the business stands on its own." Dad looked disappointed just for a beat. "I do have an idea," I added. "If you want to make that money matter, let's set up a scholarship in Mabel's name, for young women in sustainable AG and environmental science, especially those under family pressure to pick safer paths." Dad's face softened. "She'd love that," he said. She believed education should open doors, not close them. Over the next weeks, we established the Mabel Hale Scholarship for Innovation in Sustainable Agriculture. Working together on something meaningful healed more than a check ever could. It acknowledged the hurt, honored the person who'd believed in me first, and created a shared purpose going forward. On the night we celebrated the scholarship launch and the full activation of our demonstration field, we stood together at the plot's edge as the sky burned orange and gold. "I never pictured this when you said environmental science," Dad admitted, nodding toward the thriving rows and sensors. "I imagined something abstract. Not this. Practical innovation with tangible results." "That was the problem," I said without rancor. "You couldn't value what you couldn't picture." He nodded. I measured success by my ruler. It shrank my view of other meaningful outcomes. Mom slipped her arm through mine. "We're learning," she said simply. "We all were. The history wouldn't be erased. Some scars don't fade completely. But there was willingness on every side to broaden definitions and make room for authentic connection." Ethan had changed the most, questioning the life he'd dutifully lived and finding fulfillment outside that tight lane. He'd recently joined the board of a nonprofit focused on urban food security, bringing his financial skill to a mission he now cared about. "Funny, isn't it?" he said as we walked back. "The approved plan was supposed to guarantee happiness. I've never felt more satisfied than since I started asking whose plan it was." Sky Harvest kept growing. New markets, smarter systems for different environments. The farm became a destination. Students, practitioners, and skeptics walked the rows, saw the data, and left a little changed. The external success was gratifying, but the deeper piece was this. I was living aligned with my values. The validation I once craved from my parents had become secondary to the work itself. When their respect finally came, it was welcome, but it wasn't the ground I stood on. At dusk, with the fields humming softly and the sky turning cobalt, I thought about the road here. The rejection hurt. It was real. But it pushed me to build a life that fit me, not a mold. Some wounds linger. Some patterns need constant attention. Still, the path I chose created space for better connections. Ones based on who we truly are, not who we're expected to be. The lesson wasn't that I proved my parents wrong or that success vindicated me. It was this. Success is living your values, even if that means walking alone for a while. That foundation, integrity and purpose, can't be granted or taken away by anyone else. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own path? If this hit home, share your story. Setting hard boundaries with those we love is tough, but sometimes it's how everyone grows. If this resonated, tap like, subscribe for more true-to-life journeys, and send it to someone who needs a nudge to trust their direction, even when it's not the map others drew. Thanks for being here. Remember, success isn't other people's approval. It's the alignment between what you do and what you value most. The week after Ethan's surprise visit blurred into routine. Prospect calls, site walkthroughs, a new install at a downtown restaurant, and the slow, satisfying churn of unpacking boxes at the farmhouse. Even so, I caught myself checking my phone more than usual, half expecting a message from Ethan, half bracing for something from my parents. 7 days after Ethan stood on my porch, I pulled into the drive and found a black Mercedes idling by the steps. My pulse stumbled. I knew that car. 2 years without a word, and suddenly both my brother and my parents had arrived in the same fortnight. I sat in my truck for a beat, steadying my breath. I could reverse down the lane and avoid it. I could call and ask them to leave. Or I could walk up those steps and have this conversation where I held the ground. My ground. I chose the third. They turned as I approached. Sylvia looked older than I remembered, her careful grooming unable to hide the small signatures of time. Richard stood beside her, posture straight, expression unreadable. Nova, Mom said, voice shaky. You look well. What are you doing here? Kept my tone even. Ethan told us about his visit, Dad said. About your land and company. We wanted to see for ourselves. 2 years of silence, I said, the old ache stirring, and you show up unannounced. We should have called, Mom admitted. We weren't sure you'd agree to see us. She wasn't wrong. If they'd called, I would have said no. I unlocked the door. You're here now. Why exactly did you come? Dad gestured toward the fields. To understand what you've built. Ethan was emphatic that we had it wrong. That phrasing was pure Richard, careful, hedged, avoiding outright apology. But the fact that they'd made the trip was something I hadn't expected. Fine, I said. I'll show you around, then we can talk. This tour was different from Ethan's. With him there'd been awkwardness but also curiosity and tenderness. With my parents, vindication braided tightly with vulnerability. In the entry hall, Mom's practiced. I caught details most people miss. How we'd restored the crown molding, the way the light fell across the refinished floors. You've done a beautiful job, she said, sincerity softening her voice. The place has so much character. Dad stayed quiet until we stepped into my home office, where framed press, client photos and technical schematics lined one wall. Ethan said you have systems in 3 states, he said, scanning the frames. How big is the team? 15 full-time employees, I answered, plus contractors for installs. In the barn-turn workshop, I walked them through our water reclamation loop and nutrient delivery logic, how we crushed waste without starving plants, the sensors we used to map stress and fine-tune flow. For the first time, I watched Richard engage the way he would in a diligence meeting. Questions about scale, redundancy, IP failure points. Out in the plots, late light banded the rows in gold. Mom asked why we'd planted certain cultivars side by side. I showed the meters and data posts. We compare yield, bricks, nutrient density, and water draw across methods. It feeds product decisions and gives case studies to clients. By the time we circled back to the kitchen, the air between us had cooled from hostile to merely taut. I poured coffee, muscle memory more than hospitality, and we sat. This is substantial, Dad said, still in the language of boardrooms. Much more than we appreciated. That's because you never asked, I replied. You decided my work didn't count because it didn't match your ruler. Mom's hand hovered over the table, then rested lightly near mine. We were worried about your security, she said. We didn't understand you were building something with real momentum. Value isn't new just because revenue is, I said. What I did at City Sprout mattered when I made $28,000 a year. Dad shifted in his chair. We focused too much on conventional markers, he said, which, coming from him, was nearly an apology. Your brother was plain with us after he visited. You called me a failure, Mom said quietly, eyes on her cup. Those were your exact words and I didn't stop you. That was wrong. Naming it out loud startled me more than I expected. It was the culmination of years of dismissing my path, I said. Because it wasn't yours. Dad looked past me out to the edge of the fields. My whole career lived where success is numeric. Margins, assets, ROI, he said slowly. I applied the same math to my children and discounted anything I couldn't quantify. Your work has numbers. Water saved, waste reduced, access created, but I didn't have the vocabulary for it. So I rejected it. That was short-sighted. From Richard, that was massive. The closest he'd come to an apology, shaped in the only language he fully trusted. We've missed you, Mom said. Finding out from Ethan what you've built, without us, it showed us what our narrowness cost. I missed you too, I admitted. But staying meant standing in a room where I was minimized. It was breaking me. Mom nodded, unflinching for once. The fact you cut us off completely should have told us how badly we failed. Dad cleared his throat. If we were to try again, he said, what would that look like to you? I hadn't expected the question. Respect for my choices and my work, I said, not because there's money now but because the work matters. And acknowledgement of the harm, from the comparisons to Ethan, from calling my path worthless. He nodded. That seems fair. When they stood to leave, Dad hesitated at the threshold. Your grandmother would be proud, he said softly. She always said you had a way with the land. I should have listened. The mention of Mabel struck like sunlight through a cloud. I managed a small nod. That evening Ethan called. They were quiet on the drive back, he said. Dad even complimented your business model. For him that's almost poetic. I laughed. Baby steps. You okay with them reaching out? He asked. Feels like I tossed the first stone in this pond. I'm processing, I said. I'm glad they came. Where are you? I need their respect to be about the work, not just the revenue line. That's fair, he said. Seeing it in person changes people. It's proof. 6 months later, spring restitched the fields into a quilt of green. The farm thrummed, bees in clover, wind combing the rye trials, sensors blinking their quiet data language. Sky Harvest had slipped into a steadier gait. New markets, repeat clients, prototypes maturing from drawing board to install. My family dynamic shifted too. Ethan drove up about once a month. He asked smart questions and carried the long boards without being asked. I never thought I'd like getting my hands dirty, he said one Saturday, tightening a bracket on a sensor mast. If Dad could see me wrenching something that isn't a golf swing, he'd faint. He'd shaved a day off his workweek and started using the extra time to rummage around in his own curiosity. Food systems, community finance, public schools. It suited him. With my parents, change was careful but real. We set a monthly call, stiff at first, then less formal. Mom visited twice more, arriving with small house gifts. A vintage fruit bowl she'd found, a patchwork throw in colors that matched the light in the living room at sunset. It was her language. Dad started forwarding articles. New irrigation patents, corporate sustainability reports, a case study on hotel rooftop farms. It was his. I'm learning your terrain. Eventually I invited them and Ethan and Lena for dinner at the farmhouse. The night cooperated. Warm, slow air, cicadas spooling up, the orchard perfuming the breeze. I cooked a meal drawn from our plots. Salads with 3 kinds of greens and herbs, roasted vegetables, bread with a smear of goat cheese and honey. Afterward on the porch, Mom handed me a thin album. I've been going through photos, she said. We have shelves of Ethan's milestones but so few of yours. I found what I could. Inside were snapshots from science fairs, grainy photos of me and Mabel in her garden, plus recent clippings about Sky Harvest that Mom had clearly cut out and saved. It wasn't revisionist history. It was a fragile attempt to stitch a new one. Thank you, I said, because there wasn't a better phrase for the clumsy grace of it. A little later, Dad cleared his throat. It was his preamble when he had something serious. Your mother and I have been thinking about how we supported Ethan and not you, he said. About the down payment that became the final straw. Ethan shifted in his chair as if the number still had heat. We'd like to make an equivalent gift, Dad said. $230,000 for your use. Personal farm business. The figure hung there. 2 years ago I would have grabbed it like a life preserver. Now it felt like a chance to choose the shape of what came next. I appreciate the offer, I said. But I don't need it personally and the company is healthy. I watched disappointment flash and dissolve on his face. I do have an idea, I added. If you want that money to matter in a way that honors where this all started, let's create a scholarship in Mabel's name. 4 young women in sustainable agriculture and environmental science, especially the ones being pushed toward safer careers. Dad's features softened. Your grandmother would have loved that, he said. Education should open doors, not close them. We spent the next weeks doing something we'd never done together. Building a thing with shared purpose. Paperwork and bylaws, criteria and selection committees. We called it the Mabel Hale Scholarship for Innovation in Sustainable Agriculture, and its first year would fund 3 students with both tuition help and summer research stipends. It repaired more than any check written to me could have. It honored the person who had seen me first and best. Said we can write a different story. When the plots were fully online and the scholarship officially launched, I hosted a small gathering. Colleagues, a few clients, neighbors who had lent tools and advice, my family on the porch. The sky went incandescent, rust, amber, rose. We stood at the field's edge where the sensors blinked their steady pulse. I didn't imagine this when you said you'd study environmental science, Dad admitted, looking over the rows. I pictured abstraction and theory, not hardware and harvest. This is practical innovation. That was the gap. I said, no acid in it now. You couldn't picture it, so you couldn't value it. He nodded. I measured only what I understood. It made my view small. Mom slipped her arm through mine. We're learning, she said. It was enough. Ethan, meanwhile, had altered course in visible ways. He joined the board of a nonprofit working on urban food security, bringing baked-in finance skills to a mission he'd once have called nice but not scalable. On the way back to the house, he nudged me with his shoulder. Isn't it strange? He said. The approved plan was supposed to deliver happiness. I've never felt more right than since I started asking whose plan it was. Sky Harvest grew in ways that didn't shout but counted. Install teams that didn't need me on every job, a support queue we could answer in hours, not days, a prototype that finally cleared a technical hurdle we'd fought for a year. The farm turned into a classroom. Students and chefs and skeptical engineers walked the rows, read the data, and asked the kinds of questions that told me the work had crossed from novelty into necessity. None of it erased the old wounds. Some days a word or a look tugged at a stitch and I felt the rip again. But living in alignment dulled the need for external absolution. When respect arrived, it was welcome. It just wasn't the foundation anymore. At dusk, with a line of swallows stitching the horizon and the irrigation whispering through the tomatoes, I thought about the long arc from that dinner table check to here. The hurt had been real. It had also been a catalyst. Left alone with the question of who I was and what I valued, I chose a smaller, truer center and built outward from there. The miracle, if there was one, was that once I stood steady in that truth, there was room for other people to shift as well. The lesson wasn't that I proved Richard wrong or that profit redeemed my choices. It was simpler. Success is the fit between your values and your daily life. Sometimes to find it, you set boundaries that feel like breaking things. And then, in the cleared space, new growth becomes possible. For you, and if you're lucky, for the people you love. If you've ever stood at that crossroads, family expectations on one side, your own direction on the other, I'm listening. The hardest boundaries are often with the people we do anything for, but drawing them can be the most loving act of all. If this resonates, share it with someone who needs the nudge and stick around for more real-world journeys. Remember, the only scoreboard that matters is the one where your actions line up with your deepest values.